The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, tucked between the usual flyers and the overdue electric bill. I remember the sun was already high, warming the dust on the old wooden floor of the porch. I had just finished my coffee. I hated that letter immediately. Not because of the return address, my sister, Sarah, had used her lawyer's letterhead, but because of the weight of the paper. It felt heavy with accusation. I am Elias. I am 78 years old. I have owned and operated this farm, Willow Creek, since my father passed 20 years ago. It is 140 acres of good, rich land. It is the only thing I have ever truly called mine. I slit the envelope open with a trembling hand, the kind of tremor that doesn't come from weakness, but from an instant, deep fear. Sarah was filing a petition to declare me, Elias Carter, unfit. Unfit to manage my own affairs. Unfit to own, operate, or sell Willow Creek Farm. Her grounds, stated coldly in legalese, were diminishing cognitive capacity and gross fiscal negligence. I read the words 3 times, standing there in the morning sun. My knees felt weak. It wasn't just a legal maneuver. It was a character assassination. It was a complete public erasure of my dignity. Sarah, my little sister, the one I taught to drive the tractor when she was barely tall enough to reach the pedals, wanted to lock me out of my own life. She wanted the land. Willow Creek is valuable now. Developers have been sniffing around the southern boundary for months, wanting to build one of those dreadful gated communities. If Sarah got guardianship, she could sell it immediately. She wouldn't even ask me. I walked the document inside, folding it neatly on the kitchen table, right beside the wooden carving knife my father used. I sat down heavily, breathing in the scent of coffee grounds and old wood. The irony was a cold knife twist. I was the one who had spent my life protecting this place. Sarah left the farm life decades ago. She moved to the city, married a lawyer, and built a comfortable life around manicured lawns and cocktail parties. She always pitied my simple existence here, but she never stopped craving the asset. She always saw the acreage as pure monetary potential, not as the soil that held our history. She had tried this subtle manipulation before. The suggestions, the constant calls about my health. Elias, are you eating enough? Elias, I worry about you out there alone on that acreage. Elias, maybe it's time to talk to a financial advisor about securing your future. I heard the unspoken message every time. You are old, you are disposable, give me the keys. But this time she hadn't bothered with pretense. This was a declaration of war, fought in a courthouse, with the ultimate prize being my very identity. She had already contacted the rest of the family, my nieces, my nephews. I knew, because the calls had started the night before the document even arrived. They were polite, overly concerned, and completely useless. Uncle Elias, Sarah is just worried about your legacy. Uncle Elias, you know those developers are ruthless. Maybe letting Sarah manage the legal side is for the best. They didn't see the theft. They only saw the complexity and assumed the elder man was too weary to fight. I wasn't weary. I was incandescent. The humiliation of having to defend my sanity and competence in front of a strange judge was almost unbearable. They wanted to present me as a senile farmer, rambling about crop rotation while the world moved on. I looked around my kitchen. Every chipped cup, every worn cutting board, told a story of 40 years of hard work. I knew where every dime went. I paid the taxes on time. I handled the leases. I managed the harvests. I had been running a complicated business for half a century, and now my sister claimed I couldn't even manage a checkbook. I stood up and walked down the hall, past the bedrooms where my parents slept, into the small study room that held the farm's records. It smelled faintly of mothballs and aged paper. This room held the proof of everything. The history of Willow Creek was documented in three large green ledgers on the top shelf. But more importantly, this room held the proof of Sarah's history. 25 years ago, before my father died, the family almost lost the farm the first time. It wasn't the land, it was the small seed business my father had tried to run on the side. It failed spectacularly. My father was ill at the time. Sarah was supposed to be helping manage the accounts receivable while I focused on the land. She wasn't helping. She was skimming. It wasn't a large amount in the grand scheme of things, about $20,000 total, taken over a period of 18 months. But it was enough to tip the struggling business over the edge and force Dad into massive debt. She wrote off the transactions as consulting fees paid to shell companies. Clever for a young woman who thought she was smarter than the rest of us. When I found it, Dad was already too weak to handle the confrontation. I confronted Sarah quietly, late one night in the barn. She didn't deny it. She cried. She begged. She promised she would pay it back when her husband's career took off. She said she was desperate for seed capital for her own venture. I didn't report her. I couldn't bear to break Father's heart in his final months. I paid off the business debt myself, using money I had saved for a new tractor. I made her sign a document, a simple confession, witnessed by the farm accountant who had helped me uncover the mess. The document stated she had fraudulently diverted funds from Carter Seed and Feed. It was dated, notarized, and sealed away. It was my insurance policy. Not against her selling the farm. I never thought she would go this far. But against her ever tarnishing my father's memory or trying to claim some false, moral high ground. I pulled the thin, yellowed envelope out of the safe behind the bookshelf. The paper felt fragile, but the contents were steel. For 25 years, I have carried Sarah's secret. I never used it. I never even threatened her with it. I simply kept it, hoping the silence would be payment enough. But silence only encourages true thieves. Now, she was ready to destroy my life, my reputation, and my home. She had armed herself with expensive lawyers and the appearance of loving concern. She intended to make me look like a fool in front of the world. The hearing was set for 2 weeks from now. I sat there, the confession in my lap, feeling the old familiar burn of betrayal deepen into a cold resolve. I thought about what the judge would ask me. They would focus on my age, my memory, my ability to physically manage 140 acres. Mr. Carter, can you truly recall your finances from 6 months ago? Mr. Carter, are you sure you understand the market value of your property versus the capital gains tax implications? Sarah would sit there, looking concerned, nodding sympathetically when I paused for a breath, playing the role of the dutiful, worried sibling. I closed my eyes. The battle wasn't just about the farm anymore. It was about proving that my lifetime of integrity was worth more than her lifetime of deceit. I had held her secret, thinking I was protecting the family name. Now, holding that secret was proving detrimental to my own survival. I made a decision that morning that felt heavy and liberating all at once. If she was going to attack my past honesty, I was going to expose her foundational lie. I would save the farm, and I would expose the real fiscal negligence in the Carter family. I stood up, walked back to the kitchen, and picked up the summons. I studied the name of her lawyer one last time. The farm needed me to be cold. The farmer needed to calculate the exact necessary strike. I knew that revealing this secret would shatter my already fragile relationship with my nephews and nieces. They would be disgusted, perhaps even side with Sarah, claiming I was only revealing it out of spite. But my parents always taught me that a person's word is their bond. Sarah broke that bond long ago. It was time the truth paid its dividend. I placed the confession back in the safe, but I didn't lock it. I left the key hanging on the nail right beside the door. It was ready to be retrieved. The next 2 weeks were agonizing. I pretended to prepare normally. I consulted a lawyer, a small town man who knew my family but wasn't prepared for the scale of Sarah's city firm. He prepared me for the questions about my health. I prepared myself for the questions about her crime. I did not tell him about the document. Not yet. I needed this fight to feel personal. I needed to deliver the blow myself. 2 days before the hearing, Sarah called me, soft and sickly sweet. Elias, this is so painful for me. I hate that we have to go through this. Just sign the agreement and we can stop this whole messy affair. I will let you stay on the property, of course, just as a tenant. Don't worry about the rent. I felt the blood drain from my head. A tenant on my own land. A hired hand in my own home. I hung up without saying a word. That night, I sat alone in the darkness of the porch swing, listening to the crickets. I thought about my father, watching me. I pulled the key from the nail and opened the safe. I retrieved the thin, brittle document. The only thing I had left to fight with was the truth. And tomorrow, I was going to use it to burn everything down. I didn't sleep much. I spent the dark hours reviewing the facts of her theft, rehearsing the cold, hard names of the shell companies she used. I was 78, and I was going to the final battle for my life's work, armed only with a quarter-century-old confession. The morning of the hearing, the sky was overcast. I dressed in my best suit, the one I usually reserved for weddings and funerals. Today felt like both. As I walked out the door and locked up Willow Creek, I didn't look back. I had the confession folded tightly in my breast pocket, sitting right over my heart. I was prepared for the humiliation. I was prepared for the lies. But Sarah wasn't prepared for the truth I carried. I got into the old truck and started the engine. The drive to the courthouse felt like 100 years. When I stepped onto the cold marble steps of the county courthouse, I saw her immediately. Sarah, dressed in sharp black, surrounded by her expensive legal team. She looked immaculate, controlled, and deeply saddened. A picture of concerned sisterly devotion. She caught my eye and offered a small, practiced, pitying smile. She had no idea what was waiting for her inside courtroom 3. I walked past her without slowing, the paper crisp and silent against my chest. The fight to save Willow Creek and my dignity was about to begin. The silence after receiving those papers was louder than any screaming match. Clara had not just taken a legal step, she had severed the rope between us. I tried to call her first. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe her aggressive lawyer had exaggerated her intent. She answered on the third ring. Her voice was too calm, too professional. It was the voice of a banker, not a sister. Thomas, she said flatly. I didn't shout. I asked her why she was doing this, why she needed the court to decide if I was capable of living my own life on my own land. It's about protecting the asset, Tommy, she explained, using the childish nickname I hadn't heard in 50 years. It stung like a bee. You're getting older. The farm needs stability, legal stability. I told her I had paid off the farm 20 years ago. It had always been stable. My mind was sharp. My hands were tired, yes, but my decisions were sound. The lawyer says you have early signs, she pressed on. They're worried you might forget to pay taxes or sign something away to a scammer. We can't risk Mother's legacy. Mother's legacy. She threw that phrase around like a cheap shield. The truth was, Clara had always felt entitled to this land. She wanted the value, not the mud, not the hard work. She never understood the rhythm of the soil. I ended the call quickly. My blood was cold, but my head was clear. There was no reasoning with greed, wrapped in fake concern. The next day, I drove into town to see Mr. Hayes. He was a small-town lawyer, old school, who specialized in property disputes that got ugly. He read the petition Clara's firm had filed. He tapped his pen slowly on the document. Guardianship claims are difficult, Thomas, he warned me. Your sister has retained a big city firm. They are painting a picture of decline. We have to prove absolute fitness, not just financially, but mentally. He listed the requirements: a battery of cognitive tests, psychological evaluations, testimony from my doctor. It felt like an invasion, like standing naked in the town square while everyone judged my worth based on my memory recall. This will be humiliating, I stated. Mr. Hayes nodded grimly. It is designed to be. Most elders back down before the evaluations even start. They just sign the papers to avoid the fight, Thomas. But I wasn't most elders, and I wouldn't sign. We went over the farm's finances. Every ledger, every receipt, every crop sale. Everything was impeccable, of course. My books were clean enough to eat off of. On paper, Thomas, there is nothing suggesting financial mismanagement, Mr. Hayes confirmed. But that's not enough. They will claim emotional volatility or inability to withstand undue influence. We need to demonstrate more than competence. We need leverage. Leverage. That word hung heavy in the air. I thought about the house father built with his own two hands. Clara wanted to sell it to developers, subdivide the fields, turn our life's work into tract housing. This wasn't just about my freedom. It was about protecting the very dirt under my boots. I went home that afternoon and walked the fence line, just like father taught me. I needed to reconnect with the roots of my life, the roots Clara was trying to pull up. When I got back inside, I didn't head for the kitchen. I headed for the attic stairs. It was time to remember something Clara desperately wanted me to forget. Clara's betrayal wasn't new. It was just newly aimed at the farm. When our father was alive, 25 years ago, he had cashed in a small life insurance policy to help Clara start her first business venture in the city, a small, upscale boutique. Father was so proud of her ambition. He wrote her a check for a significant amount, an amount that, to us, was everything. It wasn't a loan, but an investment of trust. Less than 18 months later, the business collapsed. Clara went bankrupt. She swore up and down that the money was lost honestly due to market factors. Father was devastated, mostly by the failure, not the loss of money. He never questioned her, but I had questioned her. I had seen the spending patterns even before the collapse. The expensive car she drove for 6 months, the lavish trips. The numbers didn't add up to an honest business failure. I tried to tell father, but he wouldn't hear it. He wanted to protect his little girl. I remember overhearing a frantic phone call Clara made months after the bankruptcy to a friend. A call where she admitted she had reallocated the initial investment into personal debts, hoping the business would suddenly rebound. It hadn't. It was a quiet theft, masked by an economic downturn. Father's money, my potential inheritance, gone. Clara thought that chapter was closed, buried under 2 decades of silence and shame. She thought the memory had faded completely, especially in the mind she was now trying to label as failing. She was wrong. I spent the rest of the evening sifting through dusty metal boxes in the attic. Old bank statements, tax returns, and correspondence related to father's estate planning. The air was thick with the scent of dried paper and mothballs. I found the originals. Father's check stub, dated March 1999. The official bank letter confirming the policy payout. And most importantly, I found the crumpled envelope of letters I had forgotten about. Correspondence from the boutique's creditors, sent months before the official bankruptcy filing. Letters listing large, personal withdrawals designated as repayment of personal loans. During the exact time frame, she claimed she was still operating the business honestly. I wasn't looking for proof that she was a bad businesswoman. I was looking for proof that she was a thief, that she had acted in bad faith towards our father and, by extension, our family, long before she decided I was mentally unfit. I found the specific document. The final notice from the bank's fraud protection unit regarding the discrepancy. It mentioned a potential investigation into misappropriation of funds designated for business capital. It had been sealed away, never acted upon. She must have leveraged legal protection somehow, or simply paid off the right people to make it vanish. But the paper existed, the original record of her secret crime, proving her profound lack of fiduciary responsibility and moral character. I leaned back on the floor of the attic, the dim bulb casting long shadows. My hands trembled, not from weakness, but from the realization of the power held in that fragile sheet of paper. This was not just defending the farm. This was about finally serving the justice father never sought and the humiliation Clara deserved. Tomorrow, I would show this to Mr. Hayes. We wouldn't just defend my fitness. We would launch the counterattack. The stakes had just gotten much, much higher. The Tuesday arrived. Sarah brought him. Dr. Peterson, a clean young man. He smelled of cologne and starched collars. He carried a clipboard. He sat at the kitchen table. My table. The scarred oak where I ate every meal for 70 years. Sarah stood by the pantry, her arms crossed, a look of patient, long-suffering concern. She was waiting for me to fail. The doctor started with the questions. Routine tests, cognitive exercises. What is the date? Who is the current governor? They felt like sharp little insults. I answered them calmly. My mind was perfectly clear, but my hands were shaking, not from dementia, from rage. The doctor asked about my finances, about my ability to manage the farm's payroll. Sarah interrupted him. Constantly. Tell the doctor, Thomas, about the time you tried to pay the electricity bill twice. Tell him how you forgot Mrs. Miller's birthday, even though she sends you a card every year. Small, petty moments, exaggerated, twisted, used as proof of my dissent. The doctor just nodded. He scribbled notes on his pad. His pen scratched loudly. The sound echoed in the quiet kitchen. Every scratch felt like a nail in my coffin. She was testifying against me right in front of me, using the familiarity of decades to build her cage. He asked how I felt about the future of the farm. I looked straight at Sarah. I plan to keep working it, I told the doctor. Until the day I die, it is mine. I plan to leave it to whomever I choose. Sarah shifted her weight. Her eyes narrowed. A silent warning. The doctor finished his assessment. He packed his things. He shook my hand briefly. His grip was weak. When he left, Sarah walked him to the porch. I heard her voice, lowered, earnest. Too earnest. She was reinforcing the narrative. The poor, confused old brother. The devoted sister, trying to save him from himself. When she returned, she wore that smile, the one that means victory is close. That wasn't so bad, was it, Thomas? She said, bright and false. It's all about protecting your best interests. My best interests are not your primary concern, Sarah, I replied. My voice was low, hard. She ignored the truth of my statement. She walked out, whistling a cheerful, mocking tune. The silence that followed was heavy. I sat at that table long after she left, surrounded by the ghosts of my competence. I walked the farm later that day. The boundaries felt thinner, vulnerable. 70 years I had worked this soil. Now, my ownership was a legal question, defined by one doctor's report. Driven by my sister's greed, I remembered the early days, the years Dad was failing, the first time she tried to bleed the farm dry. It had been 2007, the year we settled the smaller estate, the year she claimed she needed help starting her small, ridiculous craft boutique. I had told her no, the farm was not a bank. We needed the capital for the next planting season. She accepted my refusal with grace. Too much grace. I had forgotten about it until the papers arrived. I needed to find the proof. The theft I suspected was buried deep in the archives, hidden under layers of time and trust. I went to the old office, a small room behind the garage. My father's office. It hadn't been used for serious accounting in a decade. It smelled of dust, dry paper, and mice. The air was thick and stagnant. I pulled down the shade and turned on the bare overhead bulb. Its yellow light cast deep shadows. I was looking for 2007. The filing cabinets were steel, cold to the touch. The labels were yellowed and peeling. My hands felt stiff as I worked the drawers open. The mechanism groaned in protest. I pulled out the boxes marked estate settlements. I began the slow, painful process of verification. My fingers, accustomed to the rough texture of hay and wood, now dealt with delicate, brittle paper. I sorted through stacks of cancelled checks, bank statements, quarterly reports. I found the ledger she managed immediately following Dad's death. Sarah's neat, sloping handwriting. So precise, so deceptive. I compared her entries to the farm's official bank records. The dates matched. The names matched. But the final figures didn't. There was a discrepancy, small enough to be overlooked during a quick audit, large enough to build a shop. $30,000 missing. It was listed in her ledger as a brokerage service fee, but the farm never used brokers that year. I handled the small sale personally. I knew the check had been written. I needed to see who endorsed it. I went back to the old heavy archive boxes. The bank kept paper copies then, not just digital files. I searched the corresponding box for that month. It was laborious. Hours passed. The light bulb hummed. My back ached. My eyes burned. I found it just past midnight. A copy of the cancelled check, issued from the farm's operating account, paid to a fictional service name. I flipped it over. The endorsement was there, scrawled quickly in blue ink. Sarah M. Hayes. Her married name, unmistakable. She didn't cash it as the farm's representative. She cashed it personally. And the address on the back of the endorsement, it was the address of the failed boutique property she was trying to purchase at the time. A down payment. Stolen. Disguised as a fee. It was confirmation. Hard, undeniable proof of criminal deceit. I sat back in the dusty chair. The chair Dad used to sit in. I didn't feel rage anymore. I felt cold certainty. This wasn't about guardianship. This was about fear. She knew this paper existed somewhere. She knew I had a habit of keeping every scrap. She needed control of the farm's archives before I found it. Her entire legal action was not to protect me. It was to protect herself from me, to discredit me before I could find her crime. I carefully placed the documents into a manila folder. The ledger, the bank statement, the cancelled check, photocopy. The weight of that folder felt enormous. The weight of undeniable truth. I slept for 3 hours. The next morning, I drove into town. James, my lawyer, was already working when I arrived. He looked tired. He had received the preliminary report from Dr. Peterson. "It's cautious, Thomas," James said, pushing his glasses up his nose. "But Sarah's attorney is spinning it hard. They are emphasizing your supposed isolation. They are pushing for the competency hearing to be moved up." He leaned forward. "We need to prepare for the worst. She is asking the court to grant her immediate temporary financial guardianship. She says you are already making poor decisions." He was clearly worried. He detailed the legal hurdles, the inherent difficulty of proving sound judgment against the narrative of a concerned relative. I listened patiently until he finished his warning. Then I slid the manila folder across his polished mahogany desk. "That is the poor decision, James," I said quietly. "The poor decision she made 16 years ago." James looked confused. He opened the folder. He examined the ledger entry. He cross-referenced it with the cancelled check. He looked at Sarah's endorsement. He went pale. He took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes. He looked up at me. "Thomas," he whispered, "this isn't a family misunderstanding. This is criminal fraud. This is serious." "Yes," I confirmed, "and it is the real reason for her concern. Not my health, not my competency, just covering her tracks before I could find the paper." James took a deep breath. He leaned back in his chair. The lawyer's gears were turning rapidly. "We cannot use this yet," he decided firmly. "This is our weapon. If we show our hand now, she will settle immediately. She will stop the guardianship suit and we lose the stage." "I want the hearing," I told him. "I want to look her in the eye." "Then we wait," James agreed. His voice was gaining energy. "We let them press. We let them parade their doctor and their false concern. We let her testify to your incompetence. We let her demand control over your property." "And then?" I asked. "Then," James smiled, a cold, hard, professional smile. "When she stands before the judge, moments before the decision is rendered, we introduce this evidence. We reveal the true character and motivation of the petitioner. It was a strategy of delayed vengeance, poetic justice, delivered publicly. The waiting felt unbearable, letting her think she had me trapped, letting her continue her charade of devotion. But now," I held the heavy folder, "my secret." I walked out of James's office with a new kind of strength, not the strength of my arms, but the strength of quiet, proven truth. The hearing date was set for 4 weeks later. 4 weeks to play the role of the frail, forgetful old man. 4 weeks to watch her gloat. The humiliation was ongoing, but the end was now written. I just had to wait for the final scene. Just had to wait for the day she claimed I was unfit to own the farm, unaware of the secret theft that was about to ruin her forever. The old ledger book sat between Mr. Davies and me. Dust motes danced in the single ray of sun, slicing across the lawyer's mahogany desk. I had found it deep in the attic, tucked behind the iron safe my father used to store tax documents. The book smelled like damp paper and time. Mr. Davies adjusted his glasses, tracing a line of shaky penmanship from 30 years ago. He was quiet for a very long minute. "Thomas," he finally said, his voice low, "this is significant. The numbers weren't hidden. They were just shifted. A minor discrepancy in the sale of the East 40 acres, back when I had the bad flu, and Eleanor handled the sale documents while I recovered. She didn't just move the decimal point. She created a phantom invoice for farm equipment that never existed. The buyer paid the full amount. The farm only received 80%. Eleanor kept the rest. I remembered that year. I had struggled to pay the feed costs. I thought the market was just tough. I blamed myself for being sick and weak. She had already started stealing, even then. 30 years ago. "It's not just the money, Thomas," Mr. Davis explained, tapping the column. "It's the pattern, the intention. This shows a long-standing intent to misuse farm funds for personal gain. It discredits her entire claim that she is concerned about your current financial fitness." I looked away from the book. I stared out the window at the busy city street below. It was a world away from the quiet fields I knew. I felt cold, but not surprised. The betrayal had settled in my bones long ago. Now I only had the proof of the infection. "How much time do we have before the hearing?" I asked, my voice thin. 3 days. We need to file this evidence immediately, Thomas. Are you absolutely certain you want to proceed with this? It will destroy any relationship you have left with her. Legally, she could face severe consequences for fraud, even this far back. I nodded once, slow and deliberate. "She chose to destroy it first, Mr. Davies," I told him. "She walked into a courtroom and told a judge I was senile. She tried to take my home and my father's land by calling me mentally incompetent. She did that. This farm is all I have left, It's my life. She wants to turn it into a housing development. She wants to erase me. The decision was not about vengeance. It was about survival. It was about proving my own sanity, my dignity, by exposing her undeniable rot. That night, I sat alone in the old kitchen. I thought about Eleanor when she was a little girl. She had skinny pigtails and loved climbing the big oak tree by the creek. We used to share secrets under the branches, promising to always look out for each other. What happened to that girl? When did greed twist her so completely? Did she look at me and see her big brother, or just a slow-moving obstacle between her and the deed? I realized she hadn't seen me as a person for years. I was just property management that had overstayed its welcome. The phone rang late. I almost didn't answer it. It was her, Eleanor. Her voice was sweet, saccharine, laced with false concern. It was a performance designed to reassure me before the kill. Thomas, are you sleeping? I just wanted to check in. I know this court thing is stressful for both of us. I said nothing. I just held the phone, listening to the static hum of the connection. I only want what's best for you, dear brother, she cooed. You deserve to rest. You've worked hard. Think of this as retirement, a new beginning. She mentioned a lovely facility near the coast, emphasizing the sunlight and professional care. The way she talked about it, it sounded like a cage wrapped in velvet. I spoke to the lawyers again today, she continued, pressing. I told them we don't need to drag this out. If you just agree to the temporary conservatorship, it simplifies everything. We can avoid all the drama. She was trying one last desperate maneuver to get me to surrender before the hearing. She was bluffing, trying to see if I was cracked enough to fold. I've already signed the papers, Eleanor. I finally managed, my voice rough. Wonderful, Thomas. That's smart. We will ensure everything is taken care of. You won't have to worry about the... Wait. What papers, Thomas? The agreement papers? No, I said simply. The documents for my lawyer. The evidence. There was a profound silence on the line. The sweetness vanished entirely. I could hear her sharp intake of breath. A sudden, panicked hiss. What are you talking about, Thomas? Her voice was suddenly hard, stripped of its gentle facade. You don't have anything. You can't fight this. You're confused. I'm not confused, Eleanor, I repeated, looking at the old ledger resting on my kitchen table. I remember the East 40 acres. I remember 1993. I remember the missing 20%. The line went dead. She hadn't hung up. She had dropped the phone. I replaced the receiver slowly. My hands were shaking, but my mind was clear. She knew. She realized that I hadn't just hired a lawyer. I had unearthed a ghost. The last 3 days before the hearing were consumed by silence and preparation. I didn't sleep much. I went over the details again and again with Mr. Davies. We had the documents authenticated. We had witness affidavits from the original farm broker confirming the missing funds. The lawyer told me to prepare for a performance. Eleanor's lawyers would try to paint me as spiteful and vengeful, trying to hurt my sister out of misplaced paranoia. We will let the ledger speak for itself, Thomas, he advised. Do not get emotional. Just stick to the facts of the farm management. I walked the perimeter of the farm that last evening. The low sun cast long, peaceful shadows. I ran my hand over the old fence posts. Every inch of this land was familiar, imprinted with my history. I was ready. I knew the price of what I was about to do. I knew the family would fracture forever. But I also knew the cost of doing nothing, the loss of everything I held dear, traded for a subsidized room in a coastal facility run by strangers. I made a final pot of coffee before the sun rose on the day of the hearing. My worn suit hung ready. I felt an unexpected calmness. The anxiety was replaced by a cold, heavy resolve. The battle for my dignity was about to begin. And Eleanor, was about to face the consequence of a forgotten crime, resurrected by the very brother she tried to discard. We were going to court. The room was small, but the silence felt massive. It pressed down on the worn leather seats. My sister's lawyer was winding down. His voice was smooth, rehearsed. He used words like incapacitation, fiduciary duty, and cognitive decline. Every phrase was a stab. They weren't just questioning my ability to run a farm. They were dismissing 65 years of my life. They presented photos of the overgrown hedgerow I hadn't trimmed last spring. They showed records of the late fertilizer order, small errors magnified into proof of my complete incompetence. I listened to her sob quietly beside her counsel, a performance she had mastered decades ago. She looked like the devoted younger sibling, forced to make a difficult choice for the good of the family. Your Honor, the lawyer finished, folding his hands precisely. It is clear that maintaining the farm requires swift, decisive financial oversight that my client, Mrs. Hayes, is uniquely positioned to provide, safeguarding the inheritance for future generations. He sat down. A hush fell. My lawyer stood up slowly. Mr. Sterling was a man of few smiles, but solid conviction. He didn't start by refuting their claims about the hedges or the fertilizer. He started with the family, the land, and the long, quiet history of the place. He spoke about the original deed. He spoke about how I had taken over after Dad died, paying the inheritance taxes myself through 3 grueling years of drought. Then he stopped pacing. He walked back to the table and picked up the thick, heavy ledger book I had guarded for so long. Your Honor, the petitioner claims she seeks guardianship to protect the integrity of the Hayes family assets. She suggests that my client, William Hayes, is fiscally irresponsible. He paused, letting the implication hang. We submit, however, that the person truly unfit to manage these assets is the petitioner herself. My sister shifted, finally looking startled. Her lawyer tensed. Mr. Sterling placed the ledger on the stand and pointed to a specific page marked by a bright blue post-it note. This is the farm's capital expenditure ledger from the year 2012. It details the funds designated for the replacement of the main irrigation pump, a substantial investment of $70,000. He handed a large printed bank statement to the bailiff. The court will note the corresponding withdrawal of exactly $70,000 from the farm's operating account on March 14, 2012. I watched my sister's breath hitch. She was starting to understand. Mr. Hayes purchased the pump with a different mechanism of funding later that year, involving a substantial personal loan taken against his own home, separate from farm operations. But, Your Honor, her lawyer interjected sharply, that detail is irrelevant to the current petition. It is entirely relevant, counsel, Mr. Sterling countered, his voice like gravel, because the $70,000 withdrawn on March 14, 2012, did not purchase a pump. He waited for the judge to review the documents. It was routed immediately, via cashier's check, into an offshore account in the name of the petitioner, Mrs. Hayes, and her husband. The silence in the room was deafening now. It was the kind of silence that confirms everything you already knew. My sister made a small, pathetic sound, half cough, half gasp. She gripped the edge of the table. Mr. Sterling looked directly at the judge. This money was supposed to stabilize the farm's future. Instead, it was used to put a down payment on a luxury condominium in Scottsdale for the petitioner's daughter. He placed the final document, the receipt for the condo down payment, on the pile. William knew this, Mr. Sterling stated, turning slightly toward me. He knew it happened. He carried the shame of her crime and his own loyalty for over a decade. He covered the theft out of a desperate desire to protect the family name, and perhaps a lingering hope that she might one day confess. My eyes met the judge's. I wasn't scared anymore. I was empty but solid. He never reported it. He absorbed the financial loss himself, protecting his sister from criminal charges, and the utter collapse of her social life. But when the petitioner used that history of unconditional loyalty, that silence, as a weapon to destroy his dignity and take his land, Mr. Hayes realized that silence was no longer fidelity. It was complicity in his own destruction. I felt the immense weight of the secret finally lift off my shoulders. It felt colder than I expected, but lighter. The sister's lawyer was scrambling, trying to argue that this was a private, stale debt dispute, not relevant to competency. But his energy was gone. The case was already decided. The judge looked over the rim of his glasses, first at me, then at my sister, whose face had completely drained of color. "Counsel," the judge addressed her lawyer, his tone dangerously low. "The court is not here to prosecute financial fraud. However, the petition before us is based on trust, competence, and fitness to manage complex assets. This evidence," he tapped the stack of papers, "suggests a profound breach of trust and financial malfeasance by the petitioner that was deliberately concealed. It speaks directly to her moral character and fitness to manage any asset, let alone one belonging to the man she has spent the morning attempting to publicly humiliate." The gavel did not have to fall hard. The sound was still final. "The petition for guardianship is denied." He didn't elaborate. He simply denied it. My sister gasped again, a dramatic, strangled sound. Then she buried her face in her hands. It wasn't the sound of sorrow. It was the sound of her future closing. I stood up slowly, steadying myself on the table. Mr. Sterling placed a comforting hand on my arm. The moment was not triumphant. It was devastating. Winning meant tearing the last shred of family fabric to ribbons. As I was being led out, I glanced back. My sister's lawyer was leaning in, speaking rapidly to her, trying to manage the public relations disaster. She looked up at me then. Her eyes were not pleading. They were vicious, full of a hatred that only a lifetime of entitlement could breed. She didn't hate me for exposing her crime. She hated me for making her pay for it. I did not flinch. I just walked away. Outside, the air felt fresher, even though it was the same air I had breathed coming in. I owned the farm again, fully and undeniably. My dignity was mine. We had won the battle in court, but the war for peace had been lost years ago. Mr. Sterling suggested we immediately file an injunction to ensure she couldn't try to access farm accounts or property under any pretext moving forward. "And now, William," he said, folding his briefcase, "what do you want to do with the farm?" I looked toward the parking lot, envisioning the long drive back to the house that was now safe. The farm was safe from her greed, but it needed more than just a competent owner now. It needed a future. It needed peace. I looked at the sunlight hitting the pavement. "I need to go home first, Robert. I need to walk the fields, knowing they are mine, without the shadow of her lies hanging over them." "And after that?" he pressed. I thought about the young couple who had sent the inquiry last month, the ones who wanted to buy a small part of the lower acreage to start a vineyard. They were young, eager, full of respectful ideas. I had chased my sister out, but I couldn't rebuild the whole life I lost. "After that," I told my lawyer, my voice quiet but firm, "I think it's time to start letting go, but only on my terms. I think it's time I start making my own final arrangements for the land, arrangements she will never be able to touch." I got into the car. The relief of fragile new thing. The farm was safe. The rest of my life was still unwritten. I knew exactly the first thing I had to do when I got back to the house. The locks had to be changed immediately. Every single one. She would never step foot on this property again. But the matter of the will, and what permanent final structure I would establish to ensure she received absolutely nothing, that would take quiet, careful thought. That decision still waited for me in the fields.